We love freedom. We love liberty. Today, we gathered here to welcome Human Rights Touch to come to Boston. More than this, we ask the people of conscience in this great freedom champion city to speak out against China's continued violation of human rights and to support civilian protests in China. Why must we confront Chinese government with human rights issues? Why? The reason is simple and clear. The Chinese government is trying to do everything in its power to bless its atrocity against humanity with Olympic gold. You must be aware that this is China's second attempt to win the coveted role of Olympic host. In its first attempt in 1991, in the aftermath of Tiananmen Square massacre, was denied. 10 years later, with the harrowing cries of victims of Tiananmen faded and almost forgotten, its second attempt was successful. But I stand here today knowing that there are thousands of smaller Tiananmen squares all over China. And I stand here today knowing that Chinese Olympic slogan, "One World, One Dream," is the furthest thing from the truth in China. For I dare to say, the Chinese government's dream is not the same as ours. It is not the same as the dream of Mr. Hu Jia's activist wife, Zheng Jinyan, and their 3-month-old daughter, who have been under house arrest for more than 200 days. If convicted, Mr. Hu will join Olympic dissidents, including Yang Chunlin, sentenced to 5 years in prison for his involvement in a petition, "We want human rights, not the Olympics," signed by farmers protesting land seizures. Nor is it the same dream as the dream of Ye Guozhou, who is serving 4-year prison sentence for organizing protests against the Olympics-related forced evictions, and Wang Ling, sentenced to 15 months of re-education in November 2007 for opposing demolition of her property for an Olympics-related project. Does she and the Chinese government share the same dream? No! The list goes on. Think of Chen Guangcheng, the blind rural activist from my home, Shandong province, who was sentenced to 4 years and 3 months in prison in retaliation for his exposing forced abortions and sterilizations in eastern China. His verdict came less than a week after a closed-door trial at which he had been deprived of his defense team. Or Dr. Wang Bingzhang, who was kidnapped in Vietnam by China's secret agents and held secretly for 6 months before his arrest was even announced, and later sentenced to life in prison. Think of Tibetan monks, with unknown numbers of them slaughtered just a couple weeks ago. What is their dream? Freedom! Ask the Falun Gong practitioners. Ask underground house church members. What is their freedom? Freedom of, what's their dream? Freedom of religion. Is it the one dream of the Chinese government? No! The time has come to tell the Chinese government that human rights are not for sale. The Chinese government must hear that it cannot benefit from Olympic gold and at the same time deny its citizens the benefits of human rights. Here today, we call on world leaders, friends of human rights, scholars, athletes, and all members of entertainment and business communities to follow the brave lead of movie director Steven Spielberg, French President Sarkozy. Like Mr. Spielberg and President Sarkozy, we must now ask and answer the question, how much abuse can we tolerate? No more! No more! If we do not make this stand now, our silence will send a loud message to Beijing, a message that will return to haunt us. In the words of the beloved Martin Luther King, in the end, we will remember not the words of the enemies, but the silence of our friends. My dear friends, if you do choose to be silent, please at least do this. Make a silent statement by wearing this small blue and yellow ribbon that I'm wearing on my lapel. I'm introducing this ribbon today as a symbol for the great need for human rights in China. It is yellow for my homeland. That's the color of my homeland. Blue for the open sky, and shaped in China's character Ren, which means human, and also in the shape of an English R standing for the rights. We ask that you join with us in wearing this ribbon to make clear to the Chinese government that they must stop repressing their citizens. Thank you for your support. What we want? Freedom. What we want? Freedom. Liberty. Human rights. Thank you.
For giving me this opportunity to tell you about the sufferings of Uyghur people. Uyghurs are Turkic-speaking Muslim people who historically, culturally, and linguistically belong to Central Asia. East Turkestan is the home of over 15 million Uyghurs. China calls it the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, or just Xinjiang, meaning the new territory. East Turkestan is located just north of Tibet, covering 635,000 square miles. China, since its occupation of East Turkestan in 1949, has been systematically carrying out a policy of forced assimilation, and it has intensified its efforts since 1991. In order to achieve its goal, the Chinese government has been implemented policies designed to wipe out the Uyghur culture and dilute the Uyghur population in its homeland. China's main policy in eliminating Uyghur culture is to restrict the use of Uyghur language and practice of our religion. Since 2001, Chinese government banned the Uyghur language from being used as a language of instruction in high schools and universities across East Turkestan. And they're planning to extend this policy to elementary schools next year. Although the Chinese constitution guarantees freedom of religion, Uyghurs' right to practice their religion is severely curtailed in East Turkestan. Employees of government, state-owned enterprises, public school teachers and students, which include most of the population, cannot pray, cannot read Quran, or fast during Ramadan, or give religious education to their children. I am with you. In order to dilute the Uyghur population in East Turkestan, Chinese government is not only transferring millions of Han Chinese into East Turkestan, but they're also severely restricting the natural growth of Uyghur population by implementing an inhumane coercive birth control policy and by trafficking Uyghur women into eastern China. Since the occupation in 1949, Chinese government has systematically transferred millions of Han Chinese into East Turkestan. And this policy still continues today. As a result, Han Chinese population in East Turkestan has grown from a mere 300,000, 6% of the population in 1949, to almost 8 million, 40% of the population today. While the Han Chinese are pouring into our homeland, Chinese government started a coercive birth control policy in East Turkestan in 1988. Since then, it proudly claimed that it prevented 3.5 million births in the territory. And this implementation of this policy includes brutal, coercive, forced abortion and sterilization. Especially in rural areas, they conduct mass forced abortions, some at a very advanced stage of pregnancy. And as a result, Uyghur women have experienced serious physical and psychological problems, including infertility and deaths. There are 15 million Uyghurs whose homeland is 4 times the size of California. And restricting the natural growth of this population serves no purpose other than facilitating their annihilation. And as if reducing the Uyghur population through birth control was not enough, in June 2006, Chinese government began a propaganda campaign to relocate Uyghur women to eastern China, using slogans such as, relocate at least 1 girl from each family during the next 5 years, or every teacher should find a girl for relocation. And there are 3 conditions for these girls. They must be unmarried, they must be beautiful, and between the ages of 16 and 25. Families who resist the program are harassed, and those who do not want to implement the policy are removed from their posts. And these women, upon their arrival in eastern China, they're forced to work in miserable conditions as cheap and slave labor, and they're not allowed to contact their families or return to their homes without facing large fines. While implementing these policies, Chinese government has shown no tolerance for dissent and has brutally crushed any opposition. Tens of thousands of Uyghurs have been jailed, and many have been executed for opposing these policies. For example, in 1997 of February, over 1,000 Uyghurs staged a peaceful protest demanding cultural and religious freedom in the Uighur region of East Turkestan. Without listening to their grievances, Chinese government used the troops to suppress the protests with brute force. The riots broke out afterwards, and Chinese government started a massive crackdown all across East Turkestan. 65,000 Uyghurs were arrested, over 200 were executed, and around 1,600 disappeared after the incident. In fact, East Turkestan is the only place in China where political prisoners are executed. In short, my dear friends, Chinese government's policy in East Turkestan is creating a human tragedy, resulting in a cultural genocide. China's unchanged and unopposed Chinese government's policy in Turkestan would create one of the darkest chapters in the human history. So we demand the Chinese government to stop the transferring of millions of Han Chinese into East Turkestan. We demand the Chinese government to remove the ban on the use of Uighur language to be used in schools. We demand the Chinese government to eliminate the coercive birth control practices. And we demand the Chinese government to end the religious persecution and trafficking of Uyghur women. Thank you very much.
Hello. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to first and foremost thank the organizing committee of the Human Rights Torch Relay for creating this opportunity for all of us to gather here today to fight this common cause against human rights violation, and for giving me a moment to share some thoughts on behalf of the Vietnamese American community here in Boston. To better express my sentiments on the issue of human rights, I would like to use the words of Martin Luther King Jr., who once said, "There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over, and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair." Ladies and gentlemen, that time has once again fallen upon us. The regime of the Chinese Communist government is oppressing dissidents and human rights activists, including Tibetan monks. The Chinese Communist government is evicting people from their homes without compensation to make way for commercial construction. The Chinese Communist government is intensifying the persecution of the 100 million Falun Gong practitioners and their families. The Chinese Communist government is supplying funds and arms to the Sudanese government-supported Janjaweed militia, who is committing genocide in Darfur. We, the Vietnamese American community of Massachusetts, join you today because we understand and share your struggles. It is equally heartfelt for us to see similar atrocities committed by the Vietnamese Communist government in our homeland. Peasants with land grievances have recently flooded the streets of Saigon to protest against the eviction and lack of compensation for their homes. Our spiritual leaders, the Most Venerable Thích Quang Do and the Most Venerable Thích Nguyen Quang, have been in house arrest for the past decades. Today is the 1-year anniversary of Father Nguyen Van Le's trial in the Kangaroo Court, where the most infamous photo was taken of Father Lee's voice being muffled by a Vietnamese government official. Look at the photo and you will see the voices of democracy and justice being forcibly silenced by raw neglect of human rights. And most recently, the realization of the Vietnamese people that the Spratly and Paracel Islands have been relinquished to the Chinese government by the Vietnamese Communist government without the approval or knowledge of the Vietnamese people. This has brought hundreds of dissidents into the streets to demand territorial protection by the government. Many of those who dared to raise their voices have been arrested and silenced by the secret police. Ladies and gentlemen, it is ironic that these atrocities are occurring in the midst of the preparations for the Olympics, whose mission, as stated in the Olympics Charter, is to blend sport and education, to create a way of life on the joy found in effort, the educational value of good example and respect for universal, fundamental ethical principles. However, the atrocities mentioned above are the opposite of the respect for universal, fundamental ethical principles. As the Olympics will be held in Beijing this year, there waits a danger, which is the possibility for not distinguishing the differences between an association with the Olympics and the acting in line with the Olympics principles. Even as China hosts an event that extols values of democracy, freedom, and human rights, this does not equate to the Chinese government agreeing to or bidding by those principles. As Eleanor Roosevelt once said in her struggle for human rights speech in France, democracy, freedom, and human rights have come to have a definite meaning to the people of the world, which we must not allow any nation to so change that they are so made synonymous with suppression and dictatorship. As supporters of democracy, human rights, and democracy, we must use this opportunity, as we are doing today, when the world's eyes are indeed on China, to expose its deception and brutality. So ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon, let us send a prayer to those struggling for a better world, and let us hope for a better tomorrow for us and for our children. Thank you.
I would like to acknowledge the presence of Mayor Thomas Koch from Quincy. He's here with us. He's supporting our event. Let's give him a big hand for sticking around and supporting the cause of human rights for all people, especially the community of Quincy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Help rescue Gao Zhisheng. Yes, thank you. Gao Zhisheng, a renowned human rights lawyer in mainland China and a member of the coalition to investigate the persecution of Falun Gong, was secretly detained on September 23, 2007 by the Chinese Communist regime after sending an open letter to the US Senate and House of Congress. His current whereabouts are unknown, and his wife and children have been intimidated, harassed, and illegally placed under house arrest. The family's contact with any outside sources have been lost. In this open letter to the United States, Gao Zhisheng called upon our government to take into consideration the ongoing human rights abuses occurring in China. He implored the United States to halt the communist regime's barbaric crimes directed against humanity. Gao issued this open letter at a time when he and his family were under extensive surveillance and subject to severe coercion from the Beijing regime. It is clear that he cared only about the Chinese people's suffering and disregarded his own safety, demonstrating his firm belief that morality and conscience will always trump. A man of great courage and character, Gao rose from a humble beginning to become a guiding light for human rights in the world's largest communist state. He made headlines in 1999 by winning the largest malpractice lawsuit in Chinese history. In 2001, the Chinese government, China's Ministry of Justice, named him one of the nation's top 10 attorneys. His open letter to the National People's Congress, his 3 open letters to China's chairman Hu Jintao and the premier Wen Jiabao, and his open letter to the US Congress brought him into the forefront of the human rights abuses in China. His letters spoke in great detail of his investigation into the torture of Falun Gong practitioners and earned the ire of the infuriated communist regime thereafter. Gao's Beijing law firm was soon shut down and attempts made on his life. Speaking on freedom, in his letter to the US Congress, Gao said, "Freedom is one of the most spiritual factors of a human being. However, the Chinese people are ruthlessly deprived of this blessing by those in power. In China, freedom is not only a luxury item, but it also is regarded as a dangerous item by several generations of dictators. The suppression of people's longing for freedom is against human nature and against heavenly principles." His proudest day came on December 13th, 2005, when he formally withdrew from the Chinese Communist Party. His wife Gang He had already quit the party a month earlier. Gao's appeal to the US Congress was loud and clear when he said, "Today, as we approach the Beijing Olympic Games, I ask you to pay attention to the ongoing human rights disaster in China and wish you to forward my appeal to the whole world. More and more Chinese people are speaking out against the Olympic Games in China, which they often refer to as the bloody Olympics and the handcuff Olympics. They raise the protest. We want human rights, not the Olympics. Under the name of securing the success of the Olympic Games, all kinds of evils have been committed in broad daylight without any obstruction, including forced eviction, illegal arrests, and persecution of people who petition to the authorities and suppression of religious people. It is plain as day to all Chinese people that with successes in hosting the Olympic Games, the communist regime is trying to achieve two goals. First, it tries to prove to the Chinese people that the world is still acknowledging the party as a legal government, despite all the suppressive and bloody tyranny and all the horrible crimes against humanity the party has committed during the past decades at the cost of at least 80 million Chinese lives. Second, it wants to prove to the world that the party is still fully competent in reigning over China and still enjoys the people's support. You must all believe, as I do, that to satisfy the evil totalitarian regime, a request to host the Olympic Games is a dark chapter in the history of the Olympics and puts shame on the whole human race. Gao, a Nobel Prize nominee, has been the recipient of many awards such as the Chinese Liberal Culture Movement's Special Human Rights Award, the Asia Pacific Human Rights Foundation Human Rights Champion Award, and in 2007 was awarded the American Board of Trial Advocates Courageous Advocacy Award. Gao initiated a famous hunger strike movement on February 4th, 2006 to safeguard and promote human rights and democracy, to protest against the CCP's utter disregard of China's constitution, and to support all those citizens who have encountered violence and wrongful persecution. This non-violent, moderate and controlled form of resistance achieved remarkable success in a short span of time. Many people in China stood up. Many courageously spoke out, and people from more than 20 provinces in China joined in this effort. It effectively exposed the barbaric tyranny, the duplicity and ignorant savagery of the communist regime. It raised people's awareness of the dictatorship and aroused a sense of participation in the people of China. It gave the outside world an opportunity to observe and think about the CCP's political system and human rights in China. It allowed democracy activists, human rights activists, petitioners, laid-off workers, land-deprived farmers, and people from all walks of life to join together in one movement. Gao Zhisheng has been compared to such greats as Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. A nation becomes great through its people, and men like Gao Zhisheng can help make China great. On the one hand, there is a brutal regime in China, a totalitarian government responsible for destroying much of the country's culture and persecuting its innocent citizens. On the other hand, there are people like Gao Zhisheng who live by the higher principles of integrity, courage, and justice. Therefore, I ask you that you support the rescue of Gao from the hands of the CCP, since the United States is known for its role as a human rights leader. This is an opportunity to demonstrate America's sense of justice and fairness. We call upon each and every country around the world to become informed about China under communist rule and to address the human rights abuses occurring in China. Ignoring the atrocities perpetrated on the Chinese people is not an option. May the darkness of the Chinese Communist Party disappear forever and the light of freedom, justice, and rule of law come to China. In closing, we reiterate Gao Zhisheng's challenge in his open letter. Is today's humankind able to confront the crimes against humanity and genocide that have been veiled under the state power? Does today's society have the courage and conscience to stand up against the long-standing and openly committed genocide? If yes, do we have the capability to stop it? Thank you.